Welcome everyone to this edition of the DASA Master Series webinars. Thank you all for coming, and we'll be getting started in just a moment. I want to welcome everyone to today's Master Series webinar, so thank you for joining us. And first off, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Kimberly Betty, and I'm the marketing lead for the DevOps Agile Skills Association, also known as DASA. I'll be your host and moderator today, and if you have any questions at all, you can submit them in the questions text box on the right side of your screen. At the end of the presentation, we will answer as many of your questions as possible and with the given remaining time. I also want to let you all know we are recording this webinar, and I will send a follow-up email including a link to the recording and to the presentation. Now, before introducing our main presenter today, for those of you who are not familiar with us, I'd like to give you a short introduction to the DevOps Agile Skills Association, as I mentioned, also known as DASA. So DASA is an open source members-driven association that has built a competence model and accreditation scheme for DevOps training and certification. But what's different about DASA? So innovators like Amazon, Netflix, Airbnb, Spotify, to name a few, have built world-class companies around digital business models. But these companies have only been successful because they've changed the way their IT teams are organized. They have created cross-functional teams made up of individuals with what we call T-shaped profiles. And this means each individual needs to be capable in more than just one specialty. At the same time, teams own the products and services they are responsible for from beginning to end. And in order for teams as a whole to be successful, they need to collectively build the skills and knowledge areas necessary to deliver DevOps effectively. And so the fact is, you can't just take a programmer or a tester, assign them to a team, and ask them to do DevOps. It just doesn't work that way. So there is a skill and knowledge gap that needs to be addressed to get the teams where they need to be to achieve higher performance. And in a nutshell, DASA provides the competence model and maturity models which focus on getting DevOps teams to a place where they can work together effectively. And now that I've shared a little bit more about our organization, I would like to introduce to you our featured presentation. So we will be spending the next 45 minutes or so with Paul Wilkinson. He is the co-founder and director of GamingWorks, a pioneer and market leader in the development of business simulation training. Paul will be talking to us about GamingWorks' Phoenix Project business simulation and how it maps to the DASA competence model. But I don't want to give away too much, so without further ado, welcome Paul, and thank you for joining me today. It's great to have you, and if you're ready, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you now.
Okay, thanks very much, Kimberly. Hello, everybody, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is for you. I'll be saying next a lot today because Kimberly's going to be managing the sheets for me. I don't seem to have control over it. I'm going to be talking today about the role that a business simulation can play in both DevOps training and, more importantly, from my perspective, in helping DevOps organizational change initiatives. Can we have the next sheet, please? Okay, so the talking points today. What exactly is the Phoenix Project simulation, our latest game? I'll explain that shortly. And why did we align that with DASA? So I'm going to be talking about how this game actually fits within the DASA training portfolio and how an ATO or an ACO could actually use this game to support their offerings. And if you're a customer organization, how you could potentially use our global ATO companies that currently use the game as well as DASA training. So that's some of the stuff I'll be covering. I'll then be looking at what does translating theory into practice actually look like, which is what a simulation is all about. And how can that help drive the change needed in organizations, showing how a simulation can help capture real improvement actions that everybody commits to take away. And finally, what are some of the key takeaways that people are getting from the simulation? based upon simulations, hundreds of simulation sessions around the world, which I think now with more than 1,000 people, 1,000 companies, I mean, we'll be looking back on what are the key takeaways and how do these map to the DASA competence model. And hopefully at the end there will be time for Q&A. If we run out of time today for Q&A because I talk too much, then we will be gathering all of the questions that you submit, and we'll be writing a blog or an article to answer those questions. So can I have the next sheet, please?
Okay, so I'm going to take it back over for just a quick second for this poll. Paul and DASA would like to understand before moving forward about your experience with business simulations. So we have a poll question for you, and I'm going to launch it right now. So we would like to know if you have participated. You would respond with the first one: yes, you have participated, or no, you have not, or you have heard about them but have not participated. And finally, you have no experience with business simulations. So go ahead and let us know through the poll, and I'll give you a little bit more time. We have almost 3/4 of you have responded. See? Just a couple more seconds. Give you 5 more seconds, and then I'm going to close the poll. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share out the results. So as you can see, about 48% of you, a good chunk, have participated in business simulations. And Paul, I'm curious, just to throw it back to you, is this a normal distribution?
No, I think we've got a lot of people taking part at the moment that have taken part in simulations. This is not a normal profile. Normally we see this much lower, the number of people that have actually done a simulation.
All right. Well, let's move forward then. I'll switch you to the next slide to continue.
Okay, right, let's get going with the content of this then. So first of all, what exactly is the Phoenix Project simulation, and why on earth did we align this with DASA? So what was the thinking behind that? First of all, the Phoenix Project is our latest business simulation game, and it's based upon the book with the same name, the Phoenix Project book. Now this book is probably the biggest selling IT book in the world at the moment, and it's the book that triggered and started off all of this global interest in DevOps. Now we got the exclusive right to build a simulation on this book. If you haven't read the book, I strongly urge you to go and read it. I personally think it should be mandatory reading for anybody working in an IT management position. And I particularly ask you to go and read chapters 25 and 26. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but I suggest you go and read them, because this sums up exactly one of the biggest problems we have in IT at the moment. So take a look at that and then send me a mail if you agree. Next sheet, please. We seem to be having a delay with the next button here. Right. Before I talk about the game then and the fit, here's a statement I'm making. DevOps will fail unless. Now, the question is, so what if it fails? This is DevOps. There'll be another framework along shortly, just like we had ITIL version 2, 3, 4. I'm sure there'll be something to replace DevOps. But DevOps is going to fail unless, if I can have the next click, please. Now, we've noticed, based upon hundreds of organizations, that many are struggling currently with DevOps. Why is that? Well, we're happy that the DASA organization has actually seen and developed the competence model which addresses many of the reasons these are going to fail. There's a statement from InfoWorld: DevOps cannot be attained overnight with a simple check and a little bit of training. This is not something where you can just get a foundation or fundamentals training or something like this. This requires also practical training and additional specialization training. And DASA has built a complete training model to take you from the basics up to advanced. It is a transformational approach. It takes time, dedication, and especially a team. that can implement DevOps. This is another reason we decided to align with DASA, because DASA recognizes it's not about individual skills, it is about developing team skills to make DevOps work. Now, Gartner also said one of the key reasons that organizations will fail is the cultural resistance. It's going to be a significant failure. So in the next few sheets, I'll be explaining to you what are some of these cultural failures, what have we actually seen around the world from hundreds of companies. So what are these failures, and how does the DASA competence model actually help solve some of these failures? So next one click, please. And an article in CIO.com also said, technology is easy. We can all learn the Puppet and Chefs and all of the wonderful continuous deployment and integration tooling and technology, but organizational change issues are far more challenging. And I think we made this mistake with ITIL, thinking we could implement ITIL processes and realizing it's a lot more about organizational change. So this all sounds like an awful lot of hard work and effort, so why bother? Let's just ignore it. As I say, something else will come along soon. Next click. Well, an article in the Wall Street Journal said, enterprises, most of them are not yet ready for DevOps, but they will not survive without it. So who cares if DevOps fails? Unlike ITIL, this is now a chief executive officer issue and a C-level issue. C-level managers are now playing panic football and catch-up, realizing that many of them have started DevOps too late and are doing it incorrectly. So this is a C-level issue to make it work. Next sheet, please. Now, this is an article we wrote. We published this on DevOps.com. It's called Simulating DevOps to Discover the Culture Thingy. As you can see there, it's based on hundreds of companies around the world that played our game to capture the cultural reason why DevOps fails. I'm now going to show you these top reasons and try to relate them back to the competence model. So let's have the first one, please. Here's the first one. We're very, very bad in IT at collaborating and communicating. I used to be an operator and I hated developers. I moved across to the development side and then I hated operators. Then I moved into the business and I hated developers and operators because none of you understand it. So we're really poor at collaborating and communicating. There's a very strong silo mentality. And even worse, there's a silo mentality in the way we learn. So we will send operators onto a 2-day training. We'll send DevOps onto a 2-day training. We'll send security people onto their own little training. Business, or who knows what training they follow. So very rarely do we actually put the end-to-end people into the same training to learn to collaborate and communicate. This is one thing that we've got in the simulation, is bringing people together, and collaborating is one of the key DevOps competence areas. Next, please. This is another key issue, just like it was with ITIL. There's a strong focus on technology. One of the products we have is the ABC cards, the attitude, behavior, culture cards in IT. And we've done workshops around the world with thousands of companies choosing worst practices. And one of the key worst practices is a fool with a tool is still a fool. And unfortunately, many people think that buying the puppets and the chefs and all those wonderful technologies will mean that DevOps is working. And unfortunately, if you go to DevOps conferences as well, most of the marketing budget is from the tool providers trying to tell you that the tool is the answer to all of your problems. Now, once again, the DASA competence model recognizes technology as just one of the knowledge areas, but has a much stronger focus on more areas, which we'll look at shortly. Next, please. This is one of my pet hates. Those of you who know me, have heard me before, know that I'm always moaning about the hunt for the certificate. We seem to think that we can send people onto a 2-day basic training, give them a theoretical certificate, send them back into the organization, and suddenly everything's going to be fantastic, like we did with ITIL. And then realizing you need an awful lot more practical skills, the ability to translate theory into practice, and some more expert skills. And again, the DASA competence model and program addresses all of these areas. Next, please. And once again here, just like we do with ITIL, we seem to think we can implement DevOps. Now, that DevOps quote I showed you a little while ago said this is a long transformational journey. This is not an implementation, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen within a year. It's not going to happen within 2 years. ING, which is one of the leading companies in Holland, has been busy for 7 years adopting and implementing and deploying DevOps, and they've still got lots of DevOps teams to create. Therefore, by definition, DevOps is nothing more than a continual iterative learning and improvement approach, which is once again one of the key skill areas in the DASA competence model. Next, please. And again. Okay, this was a very strong one, which I thought was very good in the DASA competence model, which we aligned with, is leadership is one of the biggest barriers to actually making this succeed. Leadership has to foster this culture of collaboration, breaking down the barriers between developers and operators, bringing people together to share knowledge and information, and more importantly, breaking down this blame culture. We have a very strong blame culture in IT, and you have to create an open culture. Next. Another poor issue at the moment is we seem to think that DevOps is all about software. Unfortunately, I think DevOps is one of the worst names we could have given to this thing, because we think it's all about code, features, software deployments, when ultimately really it comes down to business outcomes, which is another key knowledge area that DASA competence model focuses on. It's all about understanding the business and realizing business value, not just rolling out software. More on this shortly. Next, please. What we're now seeing is, because of all these areas above, focusing too much on the tools, focusing too much on the certificate, focusing too much on thinking it's software, we're now seeing a massive growth around the world for organizations saying we've started our adoption, but we're hitting culture problems. We've started our adoption, but we're now hitting teaming problems. So a lot of people are now using the game to develop effective teams, playing the games with teams in their organizations, and then saying at the end, what next? How do we develop team competences and team skills, which is once again the big focus of the DASA competence model, is helping teams improve. So combining the DevOps DASA competence model and the simulation is a really powerful way of hitting problems that many companies are facing. Next. And finally, this model I'm not going to explain today, this picture on the right is called the 8-field model. We're actually writing a new blog or white paper at the moment for DASA, showing how this model works, because this is one of the key problems. It's no good just sending people on to training. It's no good giving them the certificate. We have to help them transfer what they've learned back into the working environment. And I'll show you how the simulation helps do that shortly. And the next. So they were skills that we identified by playing hundreds of games. They were skills that DASA competence model worked out, and what DASA discovered also by interviewing hundreds of companies around the world. Here are some more industry captured figures as to what are some of the skills that are required to make DevOps work. Next click, please. Now, here was a survey from chief financial officers asking them what are some of their biggest complaints. Now, based on thousands of companies, oral communication and collaboration is one of the biggest complaints that the business has about IT people. We're still too technology focused. And a CIO article also said the communication between IT and non-IT workers is now in a state of crisis. It's got so bad. So we need to develop these skills. Next click, please. Now, although you can see on this table that coding and scripting skills are really important, we know they are. It's all about continuous deployment and integration and coding. Obviously, they're critical skills, but more important are the skills that the CFOs want and the business wants, communication and collaboration skills, which is what a simulation gives us by bringing people together from the complete end-to-end chain in one room to communicate and work together. Next click, please. The other thing that a simulation gives us is, it's quite funny really, lots of DevOps organizations that are coming from the developers are saying, we don't want ITIL, we don't want processes, we don't need any of that structure and processes, just let us do what we want. Whereas process skills are critical skills for DevOps. things such as Kanban boards, value stream mapping, various process engineering tools. Now that's also what we can bring people together into a simulation to learn how to use these tools. And the next core skill that the business wants, next click please, is one of the key issues and the key complaints from business is that we don't have enough business understanding. We don't understand the business at all. They asked a bunch of these CFOs when they did a survey, if we could give you a magic wand from Harry Potter, what is the one skill that you would actually give to IT people? And they didn't say coding or scripting or people or process engineering or experience with tools. They said the biggest skill we want them to develop is business understanding, which again is one of the key areas in the DASA competence model, the business value optimization and business assessment. Next, please. So here is the DASA competence model. If you're familiar with it, I'm not going to explain what it is, but if you look at the top area, the skill areas, we've already explored a number of those, such as the importance of team building and collaboration. We've explored some of the key failures, the need to create and foster a culture of no blame, a culture of collaboration, which is DevOps leadership. And we've also seen that DevOps is not an overnight thing. This is a long-term iterative journey, which again is continuous improvement. The one that I haven't particularly looked at now, which I will do, is that one on top left, which is courage. So we wrote this white paper, Active Learning, Delivering Business Value. And this white paper explained a lot of the reasons for failure I've currently told you about, and captures lots of key learning points and takeaways that people get from playing the simulation, focusing on these competence areas. So if I can have the next sheet, please. Courage. Okay, I want to briefly touch upon the courage, but once again, who cares if DevOps fails? One of the sheets earlier I showed you, CEOs care if DevOps fails because it's damaging the business. Who else cares if it fails? Well, this was a Harvard Business Report saying, what's the price of people problems at work? How much money are we actually losing because of incorrect people issues at work? So let's click again, please. And again. And here one of the biggest reasons we're losing money is this difficulty of negotiating mutually beneficial outcomes with customers and clients, the business IT problem, which is what we help to address in the simulation by bringing business and IT people together. And it's what one of the DASA competence areas addresses, as I said, business value optimization and business analysis. Critical skills for solving this problem that CIOs face. Next click, please. Look at this one. This is the one I object to very strongly. Look how much money we are wasting by sending people on training that is not useful. Sending individuals onto training rather than teams onto training. Sending people onto training without the end-to-end silo being represented in the game. Focusing too much on the certificate rather than the practical application of the theory into practice. We're wasting a lot of money. Next click, please. Silos. Silos are still causing teams to miss valuable insights and input and understanding from other areas. As I also explained, we're bad at this because we send different silos onto different training, hoping they're all going to come back with the same shared understanding, and that is simply not going to happen, as can be seen by this. So once again, we also need to learn to learn in terms of teams. And again, as I said, that's a competence area, is focusing on the teams. Next one, please. Now let's get back to that area of courage. This is a big issue, avoiding conflict. We know developers don't like ops. We know ops don't like developers. We know business don't. We very often avoid these conflicts. Now, this is something that you can get from doing a business simulation game. You bring developers, operators, security, everybody together in one room for one day to focus on why are we failing? Why have we got silos? Why can't we communicate? Why can't we collaborate? Why don't we understand the business? So using a simulation can help address all of these areas. Is it still relevant? Next click, please. So we need to change the way we train from training on silos to training together in teams. Next click, please. And here's an article I found 2 weeks ago on the internet. DevOps still suffers from the silo effect. We're still failing to break down the silo, even with all the different types of training and tooling we've got, even with all the collaboration tools. So we have to actually break it down. And a simulation is one way of doing it. And using the DASA competence assessment, hopefully they'll be telling you more about this assessment they've developed. By doing this assessment together with teams, the end-to-end teams will help recognize all of these silo problems and help solve them. Next, please. I hope I'm not racing too fast through this for everybody. Hopefully there'll be some questions coming up shortly. Now getting on to the next bit. So we've talked about how the DASA competence model helps. It helps with teams. We've talked about how a simulation helps bring people together end-to-end to focus on collaboration and communication. But what does translating this theory to practice look like, and how does that actually help drive real change in organizations? So I'm now going to tell you what the simulation looks like, and then we're going to be looking at some of the captured improvements and takeaways that helped drive real change in organizations by using this simulation game. So next sheet, please. And again, click a couple of times until the pictures are there, and 2 more, I think. Okay, so here we see people playing the simulation game. Can you go back one? Yeah. On the top left, you can see everybody gathered together around a board. They're all discussing and talking and building their own Kanban board. So here they've been given some theory, some DevOps theory about what is a Kanban board, what is visual management. And they all nodded their heads to say, yes, we know now what a Kanban board is. We understand this. And then we put them into game and said, now build one. Now build one that actually helps you make decisions and supports your work. And they struggled and they had no idea. They'd had the theory, but they had no idea how to build it. On the right, you can also see actively people more moving around, getting engaged, building things, discussing and negotiating. And the bottom left picture, in a business simulation, it is not a computer game. Our business simulations, there are lots of cards and material and lots of moving around. There's lots of dynamic interaction in the game. So next click, please. And again. Right, so one is, as you can see, a simulation is a very interactive learning. There's very little theory. There's very little looking at hundreds and hundreds of PowerPoint sheets. This is get on and do it yourself. Next, please. As you can see, we bring a group of learners face to face. Not just all operators or not just all developers. Here in these simulations that you see, we had people from security, development, operations, business, QA. We had people from the whole of the end-to-end, and they have to get together face to face and talk, which can be a big barrier and confrontation for them. Next, please. Also, we actually put people into a realistic context. That bottom picture on the left where you can see lots and lots of cards, in a simulated environment, we give them lots of projects to do, lots of features to do, lots of changes to do, lots of issues and lots of incidents to do. We create a situation where they say, this is just like daily work. If I wanted to suffer this pain, I could have stayed at work. So they learn in the game, you recognize all of this pain. This is a realistic situation we've just created. Now, by playing in a number of game rounds, we're going to say, how do you actually solve those things then? Next click, please. So we then focus on specific learning objectives. And the next click, please. And solving specific day-to-day problems. For example, we can't get developers and operators to work together. We can't get them to agree. We can't get them to listen to each other. So we'll put them in the room, and that will now be the realistic context, and they will be the specific areas that we're trying to focus on in each game round. Next, please. Now, this is based upon learning by doing. It's not, as I said, sitting down, listening to lots of PowerPoint sheets and answering multiple choice questions. Very often in simulation, this is, okay, here's the situation, here's the context, these are the roles you're playing, now solve these problems. And they have to get up, work, and do things. Next. And finally, a simulation in one day is a very safe environment to learn. When the projects fail in the game and things go wrong and projects aren't realized, there's no real damage. There's no real lost revenue. There's no real risk. It's a very safe environment in which to learn in. Next, please. So we said it's learning by doing. Why is learning by doing now so important? Now, many of you may know what this model is, Bloom's taxonomy. I'm not going to explain it in detail, but basically it's, how do we actually learn? Now, the old Bloom's taxonomy is on the left and the new one is on the right. Now, the typical way we learn in a fundamentals training or an ITIL foundation training is we give people hundreds of PowerPoint sheets and then we test them with multiple choice questions to see if they can remember what they've learned to answer the questions. We make the questions tricky enough to say, is it A or is it B, to test their understanding. Now, this is the typical way most of our training and certification is done. Next click, please. When really what we should be doing is, can people actually apply what they just learned? There's no point remembering and understanding what a Kanban board is and what flow is if you can't go back to work and actually build and apply and use a Kanban board. Then basically you've got worthless knowledge that doesn't help me as a business manager solve my problems. This is what we do in a simulation game. Much of it is applying knowledge, testing it, applying it. Did it work? If not, let's try again in the next game round. Next click, please. Now, also, this is the way that people now like to learn. More and more people are moving to this model. I'm not going to explain what it is, but it's called 70-20-10. Now, I have two kids, 21 and 24, and I explained to my kids about a typical ITIL foundation training, for example. And I said, we put people into a room for 3 days and they look at PowerPoint sheets for 3 days. Both of my kids fell apart laughing and had tears in their eyes and said, why would anybody want to do that? They said, this is the way that we learn in university now. 70% is doing. We'll be given some information, a bit of theory, and then told to go and do it. 20% is then with our professor or with a coach to help coach and mentor us to say, did it work? What worked well? What didn't work? When we're now struggling, they'll give us 10% additional theory to say, now look at this model, now look at this theory. So this is the way people like to learn, and this is actually what happens in a simulation. In a simulation, 70% of what people do is actively trying to apply what they've learned in the DASA fundamentals training. We gave you the PowerPoint sheets, we've given you the theory, now try and test it and apply it. When things don't go work and it's confusing how it works, then the facilitator or the trainer will actually give 20% coaching and mentoring, and where needed, add 10% new theory or deeper theory to really help deeper learning. So this is what's happening by learning by doing. Next sheet, please. So now, what are some of the key takeaways people are seeing from this, and how does it tie back in with the DASA competence model? What I'm now going to, I'm just going to look at the clock. I'm not too sure how much time I've got. Maybe somebody can send me a message how much time I've got left. But now we're going to look at some of the key takeaways. I'm going to focus on, first of all, what I consider the two of the biggest takeaways and two of the biggest problems in the world at the moment, and then just highlight some of the other ones. So next click, please. Right. One of the key learning takeaways is this. Now, there is a fact, there was a survey done in America that 70% of everything spent on IT does not meet the business functional goals. Now, I happen to know in Holland, where I live, a survey was done of the Dutch government, and I think 85% of everything spent doesn't deliver the functional goals in IT projects for the government. Now, in the middle, you can see one of our top scoring attitude behavior culture cards worldwide, which is too little business involvement in requirement specification and testing. One of the biggest reasons we're not getting the value is too lack of business involvement. Now, this is why I think we've totally and utterly mislabeled this thing as DevOps. And now I'm going to show you what the State of DevOps report says, and now I'm going to show you what most of the best practice advice and guidance says from big industry names as to how you measure the effect of DevOps. So next click, please. Now, these are the core metrics. DevOps is all about deployment frequency, lead time for changes, mean time to recover failures, change failure rate. Next click, please. This means, as far as I can see, we're going to have more often much faster ability to fail to achieve the functional goals while at the same time creating incidents more regularly and quicker. Now, sorry, but that's all I'm seeing coming out of here. Where are the metrics that actually show that that left-hand thing is being solved? The fact that we're actually achieving now business functional requirements, that we're actually now achieving business value and outcomes. Next click, please. That's why I personally think it should be called Biz DevOps. Next click, please. Which is why we particularly wanted to align with DASA, because one of the key areas in that DASA competence model is DevOps is all about business value optimization, which means you cannot simply do training with developers and operators. You have to do the training together with the business, and the business has to also assess its own skills, knowledge, and capabilities to stop that 70% failure rate happening. This is something we can only do together. Now, this is one of the biggest takeaways many people get from our simulations. It's not DevOps, it's Biz DevOps. Next, please. And here we see in the simulation is played in a number of game rounds. And yes, in the game rounds, we have those typical KPIs. Number of deployments, number of successful deployments, reduced errors, issues solved. And there you can see round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. Between each game round, they apply more and more DevOps theory, and they can measure those DevOps metrics actually happening. But more importantly in the game, the picture on the right, the graphs, this actually shows in the game what was the impact now on revenue, profit growth, and share price. Because in the simulated environment, these are key business metrics. The picture on the top right there is actually a real business manager, and he's plugged up onto the visual Kanban board. Not just these were the projects and this is the work doing done. He's actually pinned up on the wall, done. We've actually achieved our business value outcomes because of what you've just done applying DevOps. So here you can see the business takes a very prominent role in taking its own responsibilities seriously by playing this game. And we also capture not just concrete takeaways for IT, for developers, for operators, but also for the business. Next, please. And once again, these are 2 top scoring ABC cards worldwide. This is a top scoring card for the last 15 years, taken year in, year out with 4,000 companies worldwide. IT has too little understanding of business, impact, and priority. You can see how old this cartoon is. When I drew this cartoon, the guy is holding a floppy disk in his hand. That's how long we've had this problem. My kids, when they saw this cartoon, they asked me, they're 21 and 24, what's he holding in his hand, Dad? That's a floppy disk. What's a floppy disk? That's how long this has been the #1 issue, which is why business value optimization and business analysis is a critical skill needed for IT. Next click, please. And the second highest scoring card so far worldwide is everything's got the highest priority according to the users. Now, bringing business into the game, there's lots of business features to be realized in the simulation. There's lots of business projects. But in the game, there's also lots of technical debt, lots of upgrades that are needed, lots of downtime that are needed, lots of incidents that have been open too long that need solving. So bringing the business into the simulation as well confronts the business. It's not all about business features. It's not all about new code and new business outcomes. It's also about protecting the loss of revenue, the downtime, and the risks of outages. So this is a good way of confronting the business to balance priorities between what the business needs, but also what IT needs to be able to maintain the systems. Next, please. Another key learning takeaway, and probably Equally as important as the business is this one. This is another top scoring card worldwide. Plan, do, stop. No real continual improvement culture. We adopt things like an ITIL program and we think we can implement ITIL. We stop the program, we close it down, and everybody goes back to the old ways of working. We're in danger of making the same mistake with DevOps. Thinking we can send people onto DevOps training, get the certificate, we're now going to install DevOps teams, or we're going to install the puppets and the chefs. They're installed and now everything's working. And we forget to embed continual learning, continual improvement. As we said, DevOps could be a 7-year journey. This needs to be one of the core capabilities for every single IT team on the planet in moving forward. Next click, please. And here you see in the simulation between each game round, there's the team getting together, Biz, Dev, Sec, QA, Ops, getting together to actually reflect what happened in the last game round, what went wrong, what do we need to improve, what can we improve before we do the next game round. So here you see they're actually developing continual reflection, continual improvement skills between each game round. And more importantly, at the end of the game, we then say to them, what DASA skills and competencies did you apply today in the game that made such a difference to the performance in the game? Which improvements do you now need to take away? So at the end of the simulation, they fill in a flip over like this with actual concrete takeaway actions in which the business, developers, operators, QA, Sec, everybody is now committed to these activities. And the next click, please. And here was a quote from a consultant who'd actually done the DASA fundamentals training, had gone back to work trying to apply DASA techniques and DevOps skills and was struggling. 2 months later, she came back together with lots of other people that had done the certificate, and they played the game, and they said, doing the game after the training adds real value. After all the theory and the exercise and discussions, the real message and the real value of DevOps really sinks in during the game. Next click, please. And as Mike Orzan said, who wrote the Lean IT book, improving your work is just as important as doing your work. And this is one of the key skills people learn by playing a simulation game, testing those continued improvement skills. And this is one of the 4 key skills in the DASA competence model, which once again is why we were particularly wanted to align with this model. Next, please. And there you see continuous improvement, one of the key skills. Okay, and here is, oh, back one, please. And here, oh, one more forward. Okay, I think we're staying here. Right, here's some feedback from the State of DevOps report. It's a finding. This report comes out every year. And you can also see as well that DevOps says people that actually do continual improvement spend 22% less time on unplanned work. As a result of this, 20% more time on new work, such as new features and new code. So teaching people to do this, how to continually look at failure, to continually improve their work, is probably the skill and the capability that delivers the most value for teams and organizations. So bringing people together in a game to learn this, they all learn at the same time. And using perhaps the DASA competence model assessment as part of the game also assesses their ability to say, how good are we now end to end as a team of continually improving our work, which is a very important takeaway. Next, please. Okay, once again, very briefly rounding up now some of the other takeaways from the game. We've seen, I've stressed enough now that top left 2 areas, business value optimization and business analysis, critical, and that's what they learn, and it's critical component of the DASA competence model. Those skill areas, next click, please. Now let's just look at 1 or 2 more of the key learning points and takeaways in these areas that I want to share with you. And once again, these are all documented in that white paper we wrote for DASA, which you can download. But let's just look at one or two more in detail. Next, please. In terms of courage, one of the key takeaways that they get from the game is everybody has the right to say stop. When the simulation is playing and they realize that they don't know what they're doing, the Kanban board's not up to date, there's not enough information, they're not listening to each other, everybody has the right to say stop. And when they say stop, the whole of the team tries to solve that problem. This is a key concept from Toyota, the and-on method of saying stop. And that's one of the key learning points is it's not just the business that can say stop, it's not just IT managers. Everybody should have the right to say stop, including operations when developers try throwing things over the wall to them. And it's the responsibility of the whole team to get together, no blame, no saying, why did you call stop, but to ask, what's the problem? Why has the flow of work stopped, and what do we need to do together as a team to fix it? Next, please. In terms of leadership, one of the key takeaways that leaders get from this and managers get from this is the T-shaped skills, which Kimberly mentioned at the beginning. But these are not just T-shaped skills for the technology, but equally what they learn in the game. During the game round, somebody has to stand up to facilitate the reflection. Somebody has to stand up to facilitate the stand-up meeting. Somebody has to stand up and facilitate the improvement meeting. Now, a key learning for managers in the game, in the beginning of the game, managers think it's their job to stand up and do this. Sometimes in the game, somebody from operations will stand up, or the lead engineer will stand up. They realize in the game that you need to have at least 3 people in a team that are able to facilitate a stand-up meeting, a reflection meeting, and an improvement meeting. So that's an important lesson that managers learn. They need to empower people to reflect and improve their own work and develop these skills. Next, please. Sorry. Next one, please. Yeah. Continuous improvement. Well, you've heard me say enough about the importance of continual improvement. I'm not going to mention all of these learning points here, but one I will mention, which teams take away, is although they built the Kanban board, and very often they'll use a Kanban board or visual management board for all of the work they have to do. These are the projects, these are the features, these are the issues, these are the technical things that we have to do, which ones are doing and which ones are done. But they also learned in the simulation the visual management board should also be used to capture continual improvement items. So when we realize that a deployment went wrong, it failed because of lack of testing, we put on the board, we need to look at why it failed in testing. When it fails because information wasn't shared or not understood, they'll write down on the board. Another improvement issue for the next game round is, let's look at this. So the more teams learn to actually write down what went wrong with our current DevOps behavior and practices, what needs fixing in the next 2 weeks or next month in DevOps, they're continually making all of their improvement suggestions visible. Next, please. And finally, team building. Another thing that they learned in terms of that visual management board is a visual management board or Kanban looks different to every team. It's important that the teams learn to build it themselves. And for those of you out there that are accredited consulting organizations, one of the key lessons learned by many teams is we understand DevOps now, but this stand-up meeting stuff, this facilitating stand-ups is very difficult. It's not easy. We need some more additional coaching. Or they'll say we need additional new skills. This is that can then lead into coaching engagements, or it can then lead into additional DASA training. Next, please. And finally, recapping some of the key takeaways. Concrete, shared, agreed actions to take away from business, developers, operators. They get a clear insight into the additional skills they need to develop. which can lead on then to, as I say, recognize needs for additional coaching, or perhaps a need for now the DASA practitioner training, or maybe now the need for the DASA specific skills and expertise training. And once again, the last thing here, when you play this with leaders as well, you get leadership commitment to making change happen. Next, please. And finally, to close down, where does this simulation actually fit into this overall program? Well, the simulation game could be used as a standalone awareness instrument with companies thinking of doing DevOps. You play the game with them using the DASA assessment in between, and they get to understand what DevOps is and the fact that they need training. You can combine the game, either add it onto the end of a fundamentals or a practitioner training, or integrate it in between theoretical modules. Give some theory, play one round of the game, reflect, give some more theory. One of the key areas this is used for is in-house instrument to develop team skills. So some customers send 100 to 200 people perhaps on DASA DevOps fundamentals training, but one company we had then said we need to have 2,000 to 3,000 people now actually understand what this stuff is, what it is and what it means to their work. So they use this as an in-house game to develop skills. You can use the game at the start to help managers actually scope and agree what is DevOps, what does it look like. They discover things like biz DevOps, they discover things like the role of leaders, they discover the importance of continual improvement, and then they'll also realize and help scope a training program to realize that. And the last one, hopefully DASA will be announcing more about this assessment that they're building. I'm very excited about this team-based assessment model they're building. We're going to be running a pilot with some customers where between the game rounds in the simulation, we'll be using this DASA assessment to identify where they are in each round, what they need to improve before the next game round. So these are some ways to show how it fits in. As an accredited training company or accredited consulting company, you could sign on for a train the trainer program, and we'll teach you how to facilitate the game, and we'll also teach you how to integrate the game into your existing DASA training model. So next, please. So hopefully now I've explained and answered some of those key questions. What is a simulation game? How does a simulation game fit with a DASA competence model? What does translating theory into practice look like? Learning how to do continual improvement, capturing concrete actions to take away. And hopefully I've shown you how this now fits within the various training programs within DASA and how it can also be used to help support the DASA competence model. So thank you very much for your time. Hopefully there's now time for some questions. So back over to you, Kimberly, for managing the questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Paul. It was such a good presentation, and I want to thank you for taking the time to explain your work at GamingWorks and how it ties in with DASA. It's been a really informative experience for me as well, so it's been really good. And we have a few questions, actually. We have, I think we'll only have time for one or two, but let's just start with the first one. So first question from Gary is, who best to participate in the simulation? Is it just developers and ops people? Do other IT and or business roles take part?
Good question. Excellent question. This very much depends on where a company currently is in its DevOps lifecycle. Now, if managers have already bought into it and they're actually developing DevOps teams, like some of the big banks over here, they say, we're now creating a new DevOps team, and we want the developers and operators and the security people and the QA and the testers within that DevOps team to come together to play, to learn to be an effective team. Now, another company we had said, well, our organization wants DevOps, and they now bought Puppet, Chef, and all of these tools, and they think that's going to solve the problem, and I know it's not going to solve the problem. We need to somehow convince our leadership team that DevOps is a lot more than simply tools. It's all about culture and team working and changing leadership styles. Now, when we heard this, we then said to that customer organization, then let's organize a DevOps game and get the management team in, the head of development, the head of operations, the head of compliancy, the head of security, and we'll confront them all with the fact that they need to do this. So based upon where you are in your journey, I personally believe that whenever you do this, you should have somebody from the business, somebody from development, somebody from QA, somebody from testing, somebody from operations, somebody from database, somebody from the complete end-to-end delivery chain in the game. DevOps can only be successful when the end-to-end teams communicate and collaborate. So putting somebody from each of those teams together in a game is a good way of teaching them dependencies upon each other and how they need to be looking for each other and sharing and asking for help. Hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, and can we do one more question? Let's go with from Sergio. Sergio, I think? Sergio? It's DevOps, as you mentioned, is a full learning and transformation process that can take years. Some business requirements go beyond a single DevOps team and interact with traditional IT plus ops teams. What approach could be used to address this?
I'll just give one example of this. Very often what we see is people misunderstand what DevOps is. Often they think they've got agile teams in place with developers, and they say we're doing DevOps. We've now got developers in place with automated code and integrated code, and they have these small agile type teams for each of the business units, but the operations is shared. All of the DevOps teams share operations, which puts operations into an awful lot of stress trying to say, well, which team has got the highest priority? Which team should we be working with? So sometimes in this situation, we'll play the game with one or two of the DevOps teams together with the operators and some senior managers. And then managers realize in the game there's requests coming from one business unit and another business unit and another business unit, but Ops is unable to fulfill every agile team or business unit in the game. Now, senior leaders in the game then say, well, wait a minute, this team also needs to have a database administrator then. And then they suddenly realize, well, wait a minute, by having shared resources for multiple DevOps teams, we've created an additional bottleneck by not having enough operations. This sometimes then leads them to say, we need to have dedicated DevOps teams for each business unit. And the team isn't just developers, it also has to have a database administrator, an operator. Now, I think some of the banks have realized this, and some of the big banks don't have one or two DevOps teams, they have hundreds of DevOps teams. One of the customers we're currently engaged with has now said, we are now insourcing more developers and we're now hiring more database administrators. According to the Gartner TCO model, we're way overpriced as an IT organization because we've got too many people. However, they then say, because we've got these multiple self-contained DevOps teams, we've increased value and outcomes and are now generating something like 40 to 50 million euros every year more by being able to deploy the features much faster. Yes, we got more people, but we're making more revenue because of it. I'm not sure if that's answered the question fully, but hopefully that just gives some sort of tip towards it.
Great, thanks. And we have just one short last question. James wants to know, when should we do the simulation after DASA fundamentals?
Right, good question. Sorry, I have to say depends again. Now, if your organization currently has the willingness to spend 3 to 4 days in a row, you could do the game directly after the fundamentals training. So do the fundamentals training, let people have the stress of filling in the certificate and doing the certificate, and then playing it the next day. That's if you're doing it with one team from the same organization. Equally, what you could do is you could say, if we've already got DevOps teams active, give them the fundamentals training first, give them the certificate, let them then go back and try to apply it, and let them see and experience what issues they have. Hey, nice that I've got the training, but why aren't people listening to me? Nice I've got the training, but I can't convince my business managers. So you could let them go back and try and experiment and explore, and then when they're starting to get frustrated that it's not working, you could then play the simulation game to say, let's refresh the skills and now take it a level deeper. Now you've tried applying it, but you're hitting some barriers. Let's see together how we resolve those barriers. Now, unfortunately, the last answer to this is we never play a game just as a game. One of the key concepts of doing a simulation game is what we call the intake interview. And that is a 1-hour interview with the customer to say, where are you at the moment in your DevOps journey? What have you currently done? What is currently working? What are some of the frustrations you're facing? Who's facing these frustrations? What are some of the frustrations you're facing in terms of people not talking to each other, throwing solutions over the wall? So in short, we try to identify what are the current problems you're facing. If we know what the current problems are you're facing, then we can decide which stakeholders need to be in the game, which roles in the game they should be playing, and at the end of the day, what are the 5 or 6 key learning points you want them to discover when they play this game? So hopefully that's a bit of an answer.
Great, thank you, Paul. And as we're running out of time, I am going to have to save the rest of the questions to be sent out, and we'll address them in a blog, as Paul mentioned earlier. We will also be sending you a follow-up email with a link to the presentation, a recording of the webinar, and in addition to that, we'll be sending you the white paper that Paul co-authored with DASA. So you will have a copy of that in your inbox along with those other items. Other than that, you will receive the follow-up from me within the week, and I hope everyone has enjoyed the session, and that I want to thank you all for joining us for this edition of the DASA Master Series. So everyone, please have a wonderful rest of your day, and goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for taking part and listening.